Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're pleased to have another in the series, another webinar in the series that's associated with modernizing infrastructure. That's being sponsored by the Build America Center. Very happy to have Sasha Page, who's a principal with Rebel, talk to us today about leveraging underperforming retail properties on arterial roads for affordable housing. And I think he's aptly titled this as Lemons to Lemonade. So without further ado, well, one admin item, I guess. If you have questions as we're moving along, I'll be monitoring the chat. So you could type those questions into the chat, and if it's something that makes sense for us to ask Sasha to maybe pause and answer, we'll do it at that time. If it's something that seems more appropriate for the end, we'll leave that for Q&A at the end. So with that administrative announcement, again, thanks everybody for being here, and I'll turn it over to Sasha.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mike, from Virginia Tech and QC from the Build America Center at the University of Maryland. I appreciate having the opportunity to participate in this session, and hopefully this will be a nice complement to the rewarding series that has occurred previously. As Mike said, my topic is to discuss underperforming retail properties and really suburban arterials, and a way to use those to leverage affordable housing and really mixed use development in general. What I'd like to do is talk to you kind of about what inspired me to look into this area in more detail. The AB 211 legislation in California that has spurred this movement in California, and how that could be applicable to other locations throughout the U.S. And I have a couple of examples here, just a fraction, I think, of what's happening all over. And then I'll share some of my takeaways in this emerging area. So first of all, AB 211 is a law that was passed last year by the California legislature. It deals head on with the issue of affordable housing crisis in California. And really, obviously, this is not something unique to California. What it basically says is that all these unused arterials, these arterial highways, suburban roads, essentially non-interstate highways that are sitting empty to a certain extent, as the demographics change and the retail patterns change, they should be leveraged for affordable housing and mixed-use development. And under this law, by right, a developer can go in and develop affordable housing and other housing without having to go through often an arduous local planning process, which unfortunately has stymied this kind of development in the past. And the glue to this that I think is interesting for us in the transport world, where we're sort of coming from here, is the fact that bus rapid transit or other kinds of transportation should play a role here, as was intended originally. And I want to be clear that this work, I think, owes a debt of gratitude to Peter Calthorpe, a new urbanist, visionary and planner, and who sort of, I think, developed the idea and helped usher this through the state legislature. So as you can see here, essentially, developers can build 30 to up to 80 units per acre along these arterials, as long as 15% of the properties are affordable, as defined as 80% or lower area median income or qualify for Section 8 housing. It also depends on the width of the corridor. So this is driven in part by the width of the corridor. Plus, if you are a half a mile from a transit stop, which include bus rapid transit, then a developer could build up to 80 units per acre, which is kind of a sweet spot in our understanding for many developers for making these kind of projects realizable. So there is some qualifications to this. The property should not be near a real highway. They shouldn't be in an urban area. They shouldn't be near an industrial area or near a natural gas area. The idea is to create attractive housing neighborhoods, and unfortunately, you don't necessarily think of a strip center, a arterial highway as an ideal place to have housing, but with good planning and great design, one can make this attractive. And here is one example of what an arterial road looks like. This is a Google Street View of El Camino Real, which is one of the sort of instigators of Peter Calthorpe's and the inspiration in California. It's between San Francisco and San Jose. A very dense part of California, and very desirable where housing is very acute. This area, of course, is not very dense, as you can see here in this example. And you could do a Google Maps in the entire way between San Francisco and you'll see similar types of 1- and 2-story developments in an area that is shouting out for more housing. And I think many of you can sort of recognize this in your own backyards, and you'll see this was my backyard. This is not dissimilar to many places in the U.S. So again, what the glue that sort of pulls it all together is probably bus rapid transit. That makes sense. It's relatively affordable. Light rail or heavy rail can also help make this work, but to make these dense facilities work is bus rapid transit, and that's something that I'll show in several examples. So that's the example for AB 211. Maybe I'll just stop there and see if there's any questions about that. I will make these slides available, and there are links to the actual legislation. But does anyone have any questions they want to just ask me before I go on to some non-California examples? Okay, hearing none, I'll continue here. So what I want to show is in California, this legislation allows development by right. In other words, a developer, if I understand correctly, and I'm not a land use planner in California, but a developer essentially can go in and say, we can build this on this piece of property. We don't need to go through an extensive local zoning or planning process. That's a bit top down and not everyone's cup of tea. My thesis is that there are other places in the U.S. where this can happen, maybe more organically from the ground up, or maybe from a regional standpoint. And we can learn from those as well, because while not everything that happens in California stays in California, it's not everything applies elsewhere. So I think it's important to see what other examples there are. I'm going to start with Montgomery County, Maryland, an area that I know fairly well. I used to live there, and I do work there. And Montgomery County, Maryland is known for fairly progressive planning in the last 30, 40 years. For those of you who don't know it, the southern part of it is part of the District of Columbia, sort of the Beltway metropolitan region. It really helps define Washington, D.C. And the blue areas are sort of classic neighborhoods that were developed after World War II and are classic suburbs with cul-de-sacs, winding roads, and no sidewalks, and pretty poor land use planning, single family houses, and not much density in general. And the county recognized the pressures that were occurring as time went on, that they could not repeat that type of planning. and they developed a pretty progressive idea of a wedges and corridors approach, whereby development would be encouraged along the major corridors, like here, the I-270 corridor, and the agricultural lands would be preserved in these very generous reserves in a brown space. And out of that emerged this corridor called the Rockville Pike, or Wisconsin, or MD 355, which is an old road that eventually goes north to Pennsylvania, and is an important connector between Bethesda and Rockville and the other smaller towns in the area. And so that was the sort of the initial planning, and again, it's fairly progressive, and I think it's helpful for those of us to look at sort of planning history to see where this has come from. But moving to, from 60s to the 80s, Rockville Pike itself looked like many places that you'll see again, suburban arterials, as I mentioned earlier in California. It was rich in cars, rich in asphalt and retail, but poor in pedestrians and density. And this is called Mid-Pike Plaza. As you can see, the large open parking area there, not filled very much. And then there's a big box retailer, Toys R Us. You may have heard of that. That is now defunct, which defined part of this. And the owner of this particular property and other properties nearby, really decided that this was not the future for them, even though it was still profitable at that time in mid 2000s, and petitioned the county to upzone the property to allow much more density. The county, in its wisdom, came back and said that that's fine. We don't want to do this piecemeal. We want to have a overall plan for the area. And from that was born what was called the White Flint Sector Plan, as you can see on this chart. This is developed in 2010, and it was complemented by another additional plan that was expanded, called the White Flint Sector 2 Plan in 2018. But essentially, as you can see here, hopefully in this chart, what the county plans allowed and subsequent zoning is much greater density around the metro station. And you can see my cursor around this right there, the White Flint Station, now called North Bethesda Station, which would allow up to 300 feet of buildings, and an FAR, floor area ratio, of between 1.5 and 4, much higher than the 1 to 2 FAR that had been prevalent throughout this area. Really trying to encourage a new, maybe an urbanist little city between some of the major locations in Bethesda and Rockville. And with that came the requirements for greater housing, moderately priced housing that's less than 70% of area median income, and workforce housing, which is less than 120% of area median income, and a much greater split of residential in this corridor than commercial. Even though, as you can see in this diagram, there's a number of your classic suburban developments outside of this area with their winding streets and cul-de-sacs. So it's a sort of a complicated process by increasing density and housing in this area, but also and then decreasing some of the commercial activities. And that was the plan, and it took a lot of work to get there. In parallel, the county decided that it wanted to focus on greater bus rapid transit and expand its system of mobility beyond the existing metro rail that is in the county, to make transit accessibility higher priority. And among its 100-mile BRT network that it planned, it has been focusing on about a 22-mile BRT system from Bethesda and the metro stations to north of Clarksburg, including the White Flint area, which is number 2 there. And the idea is to transform MD 355, the Rockville Pike, into an urban boulevard with BRT and helping to fill in critical gaps and make this a more walkable place. And here's one of the visions of that walkability. It's to encourage both pedestrian and bike and BRT and slow down the traffic so it's not less of a highway and more of a boulevard, as you can see by this illustration. So going back to the development, one of the key successful projects, as one say, that came from the White Flint that emerged was Pike and Rose, which is based on that previous location I showed you before, that empty strip center. And on top of that, they have built mostly complete over 800 rental and condo units, numerous restaurants, shopping, meter shopping, a hotel, a park, and as well as the first East Coast dog park as well. And then a number of office buildings, some of which are spec, have not been completed yet, but other ones have been completed, as you can see indicated with the red circles. And so those are really an example of a successful project in the vein of AB 211. The Rockville Pike, as you can see, is on the right here. And the intent is that there'll be development all around this in a similar vein with this level of density. The challenge has been that not all of the infrastructure has been built yet. The BRT is still in planning, and some of the expansions to the infrastructure, like an enhanced grid network, making the streets more square and more walkable, is only now coming into fruition. And an expansion of another metro station has also not occurred. And in part, the county, in its review of the White Flint effort, has been somewhat disappointed by the fact that only 20% roughly of the residential and commercial projects that could have been built here have been built. And there are a lot of plans on the table, a lot of sketch plans, but the White Flint vision has not occurred as envisioned yet. In fact, the planners believe that it's going to take 50 to 60 years before White Flint in the area is fully built out. This is not necessarily surprising, and for a couple of reasons. The infrastructure that's needed for these kind of projects has its own cycle and its own funding sources and its own challenges. And so land use planning and transportation do not always go hand in hand for good or for bad. And so there's a bit of a disjunct here, which has occurred here. So your future condo owners or your developers have not seen quite the demand for this, because it's still hard to see it when you don't see the BRT or you don't see the new park. Also, these are very big projects, and any big project like this takes many years. Kind of the rule of thumb that we often use is it takes 2 or 3 business cycles for projects like this to be realized. Business cycle being 5 years, maybe 15 to 20 years for something like this. But nevertheless, it's a bit of a caution to this vision of the suburban arterial transformation. It does take time. And the other issue that is brought up, the fact that employment, reflecting the development here has not occurred. To get from the housing to employment takes over half an hour, even on transit. And therefore it makes it less attractive, and it's less of a mixed use facility. That has both those issues have been, to a certain extent, will be addressed very shortly. The employment issue with the development of additional commercial buildings is being addressed. Choice Hotels has agreed to locate there its headquarters, And some of this infrastructure we've been talking about is being developed. The county had a big industry day about its BRT program and is making progress on that. But there's clearly a disconnect, and that's something we have to, I think about when looking at these types of projects. Let me show two other examples that also illustrate this. One is what's called the Flatiron Flyer in Denver, Colorado. It's a bus rapid transit between Denver and Boulder. This is one of many rail lines or many transit lines that the Denver RTD has developed in the last 20 years. And on that line, there are a number of TODs, including ones on the BRT system, the Flatiron Flyer. And here's an example on the picture here of one of those stations in Broomfield, Colorado. As you can see, it's a classic mixed-use development, 4 or 5 stories. And at the end of this avenue, there is a bridge that links people to the very attractive stations, the BRT stations. So the US 36 is now a managed lanes that was redeveloped last 10 years with the RTD in conjunction with developing the BRT. It was actually an old toll road, then the tolls were taken off. It's not quite the suburban arterial as I've shown here previously. It was more of a highway, but nevertheless, there was sprawl that was occurring. The planners at RTD really encouraged TOD activity around their stations, as well as communities like Broomfield as well in their plans. And essentially, they've been relatively successful in encouraging TOD activity around those stations. As you can see in RTD's analysis of the development activity around these stations over the last 20 years, the Flatiron Flyer, as indicated by the arrow, has roughly 5,000 units of new housing that's been built or will be built in this period of time. And that compares well to other rail corridors in the RTD system that have been actually around a lot longer. Probably the disappointing part is that the affordable housing is relatively small comparison, and Boulder, Denver suffers from some of the problems that many communities do, especially in California. Housing is very expensive, and it's in great need for additional housing. So I think it's a great illustration how BRT can play a role in transit-oriented development, and can play that role that was envisioned in AB 211 to be the glue that brings these suburban arterials together. One more example I'm going to show is in Miami-Dade County, Southeast Florida, a highly growing area as well, also with acute housing issues. They are developing a very ambitious SMART plan. As you can see here on the chart on the left, they're looking to expand their existing heavy rail metro system in the solid colors, north, west, and also south as well. And in the south, they're developing a 20-plus mile BRT, the South Dade Transitway, as you can see here, to link the end of their, sort of the denser areas and the metro system to classic suburban areas along what's called US 1, which is again a classic suburban arterial. The bus rapid transit is going to be on a parallel former railway, the Flagler Rail, which Henry Flagler was the person who essentially helped develop much of eastern Florida. This goes all the way to Homestead. And what the planners and the county has decided is that along that arterial, they're allowing much greater density than your typical suburban density. They're allowing 60 units per acre if the development is a quarter of a mile from the alignment. And that is, not dissimilar to the kinds of new entitlements that are being provided in California under the AB 211 program. So what and what comes with this is greater density and heights of 8-story or higher. And the fruits of this effort are paying off. It appears, at least anecdotally. The county has developed an affordable housing project very close to the BRT, and you can see this in the first circle here. This is a senior housing project called Caribbean Village, very close to the in my cursor here. This here is the bus rapid transit way, and here is US 36. What I like about this Google view of the area is you can see US 36, and you can see along here a number of classic attributes of these suburban arterials. You see big box stores here, some shopping malls, a lot of large areas of underdeveloped space. And here in this large circle is a mall, the Southland Mall, which, like many enclosed malls of its type, is going through a repositioning. It has encountered financial difficulties. Some of the big box stores have closed down, including Sears, and it has recently been bought out by a private equity firm that's going to transform it into a mixed-use facility. They're going to maintain the mall, but they're going to add around 4,000 housing units, some medical offices, a hotel, and other attributes, including a bridge from the mall to the bus rapid transit station. And I think, again, it's a nice example of what AB 211 is trying to achieve. These plans have been approved by the local municipality, Cutler Bay, and are very compatible with what I just told you before, the kind of density that the county is now encouraging and allowing for along this otherwise very suburban corridor. So, my takeaways are that other communities outside of California probably can have similar outcomes as intended in AB 211. Of course, different planning regimes, different laws in each state and each community, but they too have acute housing issues. Maybe not quite as acute as in California, but this approach can, I would pose, help address those. These arterials are all over the U.S. in both urban areas and suburban areas. As you saw from some of these examples, and really I think all of the examples, local planning, either regional planning or planning on the cities, can create these suburban TOD projects, encouraging housing, some affordable housing, maybe not as much as folks would like. But some of these outcomes, the planning can foster these outcomes indirectly or directly, as you can see these examples. And transit, primarily bus rapid transit, can play a role here in fostering this and providing that important glue for these projects. So I'd like to just a couple of takeaways here. Like large projects, these suburban arterial developments have challenges that you need to address. First of all, they take time to develop. These things aren't going to happen overnight. They take time to plan and the time for the real estate market to be comfortable with it and go through a couple of cycles of development. So it's going to take some time. As expected, these require stakeholder consensus, local level and regional level. A lot of talking, a lot of meetings, because these are a shift from traditional suburban development. AB 211 was very careful to limit this activity really along the arterials, not to disturb single family housing. Very sensitive to opposition to that in California. There are other laws in California that are dealing with greater density in single family housing projects, but and I think that's a kind of a lesson learned here as well in terms of stakeholder consensus. I think the other thing is making sure that there's the right housing and employment mix. That's important for these, and very important for us in the infrastructure policy or finance or research world to make sure that the transport, the kind of infrastructure can happen as soon as possible, because without that, there's a cycle. It affects the ability for development to occur, and it creates maybe an imperfect spiral, if you will. So providing that infrastructure ahead of time can make these projects more attractive. Of course, there's a cost to that as well. And I think, there's a question about the COVID trends that is still to be answered. What will COVID trends, the post-COVID trends, have on all kinds of development and regional development? I think right now, everything would indicate that they're positive. There is more development in suburbs, more interest in developing their downtowns are having a tough time. But that's something that needs to be monitored as one goes forward. So I'm going to conclude here. I'm happy to share these slides, and I also have an article that I wrote on a related, very similar topic several months ago, and happy to share that as well. So, Mike, I'm going to conclude there, and happy to answer any questions that you or others may have.
Sure. So thanks very much, Sasha, for that presentation. Folks in the audience, any questions that you might have for Sasha? And I think our audience here is small enough that we could just have you unmute and ask the question directly if you'd like to do that.
Hey, Sasha, Marshall McCumber here. Thanks for your presentation.
Hey, Marshall. Good to see you again.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, thanks. And good to see everybody here today. My question is, I was thinking about the Montgomery County project there. And your point about, I think you said only 20% might have been built out at this point. And some of that is due to the lack of infrastructure. I was curious from your view, especially in the suburbs, not so much the downtowns, but the suburbs. Is it an infrastructure first challenge in a lot of these projects before the requisite planning permits can be provided?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think this is a problem that's sort of plagued all kinds of local planning. You have your planning processes, land use planning that takes its own has its own cycle, and you have transportation planning, which often has its own trajectory. And while they do overlap, and I think Montgomery County has been very conscious of that, they do have their own timings, and therefore making this work perfectly is impossible. Really, I think it's not going to happen. I think if I were a developer, the ideal is that this is all developed ahead of time. I see my bus rapid transit system. I have my metro entrance. Of course, from the county's perspective, where's the money coming from? In the case of White Flint area, there is a special taxing district that has been implemented that essentially charges or makes the developers pay for roughly 80% of the infrastructure in that district. That's the reworking of the roads, the metro entrance, and other improvements, the bike ped improvements. And so there's a bit of a chicken the egg issue there. If the infrastructure is not there, they can't develop. If the development's not there, there's not enough money for the fund, and that has been noted in the county's reports. So I think the reality is it's not going to be perfect, and one has to understand that transition period, both as a developer and then planners, but also as from a transportation planning. It's not going to happen all at once. It's going to happen over time, and improvements will be made incrementally to enhance the system and make it more of a mixed use location.
Thank you.
Sasha, so I do have a question, and I mean, tax increment financing has been in the sort of the toolbox for quite a long time. Are these types of developments, is that kind of strategy, possible? I'm not as, or is residential sort of housing, not taxed at the same rate as, say, commercial development or what have you? So I guess my question is, is that a viable sort of approach potentially to to essentially, helping with this kind of chicken and egg problem that you have.
Yeah.
Kind of things.
Yeah, no, good question. TIFs, as they're often called, are I think policymakers really like them because, as you may understand, they're not additional taxes. They're reallocating future taxes to different uses. So they're more often talked about and offered. The other hand, there's a limit to them, as some communities have found. And essentially, you're giving a tax break to a development or to a project, and there's a limited amount of available taxes that can occur because, of course, future taxes that may reflect the growth in a area like White Flint needs to also go to pay for services, additional services, police, fire, schools, and that's what property taxes are to be paid for. So it's not an unlimited set of resources. I think that special assessments in general make more sense because it's an incremental source of funding, and as here as an example here, developers are willing to pay for this in general if they can see what they're getting for, and the financial markets actually may fund that or finance that as for instance they have done with the Dulles Metro Rail project in Northern Virginia, not far away. That project in part has been financed through special assessments on the property in the area. There are other mechanisms where they're available, like joint development. WMATA, the transit agency, in some places, shares its property as many agencies do, and in return for benefits that they receive, they'll allow a developer to develop. That's not happened as much here in this project, but they have done that elsewhere. So that's another kind of value capture mechanism that could be applied. But I think TIF is one of those tools that is obvious, is a low hanging fruit, but also has its challenges, as I mentioned.
Thanks. Other questions that folks might have?
I guess I have a question. This is Brian Goodson. I'm from the Department of Transportation. You talked about the different cycles between transportation plans and land use plans, but now we've recognized that the importance of matching the two. What's prohibiting, like the DOTs and the department, like Montgomery County Planning Department, from matching those cycles?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I had sort of the obvious answer for it. I'm not a planner. I have stayed in the Holiday Inn a couple times, so I pretend to act like a planner sometimes. I think it's a long history. I believe. There are different functions, different governmental functions, and I welcome anyone here who has a better perspective. But obviously, land use is a local function, city or county function. Again, it can be city or town function, whereas transportation planning is often a regional function, a county function, and in fact, state function. The state of Maryland was involved in initial planning for part of the BRT program. So those are different agencies, and while all government should work together, it never does for all kinds of reasons, because they have different goals. And different funding sources, right? We are obviously Build America Center is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Transportation with its regulations and its goals. HUD, which focuses on affordable housing, has its regulations and goals. So, there are the classic differences you have between various agencies. I think, to be fair to Montgomery County, they are very aware of the different streams of planning. But the nature of the different kinds of plans make it very prohibitive to, do these all together. Although I think there's lots of references to each one in the respective plans.
Okay, thank
So
you.
there's a question. Yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Hey,
Yeah.
Maritza Peachin, I actually just joined the Build America Bureau 3 weeks ago, so I'm brand new. But I would add I understood your question, Brian, to be, why like these don't always sync up so well. And I think it's probably because not just from a planning perspective, but from a market perspective, land use plans and developers are really driven by market conditions. And like those cycles change and go up and down. And whereas transportation projects are I guess they do get impacted by the market in terms of inflation and interest rates, but not in the same exact way as developers who are going to the private market for financing do. And so that's different. And then also like private developers are impacted by the whims of Americans and what they want to do. Do they want to work out of an office, or do they want to work out of their house? Do they want an apartment? Do they want a single family home? And so sometimes those things are difficult to align or predict. And having worked at a local government for a city, what you shared was very true. There's a politics of land use. Land use is a very local decision, how you zone land. And one of the things that I always wish maybe regional, I think some regions are stronger at this than others, is pushing more suburban localities to densify around transit as some sort of requirement in order to get that transit access. And that's very hard because of the way the Supreme Court has viewed land use being something that happens at a local level. Anyway, that was my thought. Not a question, but sort of conversation.
Yeah, great input. Thank Maritza.
And maybe just a comment on Maritza's point. I think that is an issue that I believe California has thought about doing and forcing communities to densify around stations. I think that legislation did not pass, but I believe Massachusetts, at least MBTA in Eastern Massachusetts, which has a very large commuter rail system, I think is requiring communities to allow much greater density immediately near its stations. With controversy, of course, I'm sure there's lawsuits flying, but they have apparently had some success in doing that, at least around certain MBTA stations.
I guess, and I would follow up to Maritza's point that, while I'm certainly not a real estate expert, I do read, I try to keep up with a few things, and that, given the move with interest rates of late, I do know that the multifamily housing market is essentially in decline, if you will, or starts on any multifamily housing is definitely in decline, and is forecast to be so for the next couple of years. So that's obviously going to pose challenges, if you will, to this type of development, at least until things settle down. And good part of the reason why, again, as she was describing, there's maybe not a alignment between what's happening in that kind of space versus what's happening in the transportation space. So looks like there's got a question in the chat here real this comes from Quincy. I wonder what is the extent to which the sort of TODs qualify for federal funding, if at all? So Quincy, I guess your question is, are there any specific programs that I guess are trying to incentivize this kind of development?
Yeah, I'll happy to take a stab at this. The FTA definitely directly and indirectly incentivizes TOD has a whole TOD planning program. It awards grants, I believe, to numerous communities who are planning TOD projects or TOD corridors. The CIG program, the Major Capital Investment Grant Program, also takes into account land use and essentially TOD-like activities. And then also, and I think Maritza has her hand up, I may be stealing her thunder, the TIFIA and RIF programs under the bill have now been allowed to officially or have more powers to support TODs. I'll stop there. I'll let her take over there, but that's definitely an opportunity to help finance, if I understand correctly, their definitions, some of these kinds of projects.
That's exactly right, Sasha. We now have the ability to finance at low interest rates, joint development along transit, fixed route transit, BRT counts within a half mile. There's a project that we're going through the final stages of review to get the loan approved to do a mixed use project that will have a garage and a library as well, a public library. So that's one of them, and it's up to 49% of the total project cost.
Yeah.
So the TIFIA, the TIFIA project loans don't just fund the transportation infrastructure, but will fund vertical development as well.
Right. I think that addresses Mike's point that in this environment with high interest rates, TIFIA and RIF and other types of innovative finance programs are very attractive now to developers. And my anecdotal understanding is that there's a lot of interest in those programs. And the fact that it's not just the infrastructure itself, but it's also the vertical. And I think especially in RIF, the vertical development, some maybe housing potentially could also be financed. Could be very exciting for some of these projects.
Any other questions?
Marsha, so QC here. So it's probably a question not only for you, but also for others like, Marisa there. So the White House actually published a resources guide called Commercial to Residential, something like that, Commercial to Residential Conversion. I think it's called Conversion Guide. And which also lists the TIFIA as a tool for such kind of real estate development. So you convert the commercial real estate to residential buildings there. So does that mean actually that your TIFIA loans or RIF loans can be used for this commercial or this development whenever they are close to the bus stop or metro station there?
I would first defer to Maritza on that. I don't know of specific projects like that, but I can imagine if it fits into the, if it's fostering housing or good public uses of the transit station, that the TIFIA program would be open to that.
I missed the question. I'm sorry. So
the question basically is that so can we use the TIFIA loan for what do you call this, like a commercial to residential conversion right now?
More on that very soon. I think that was going to be something that would be, more on that soon. We could probably do a different webinar on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Like there's an anonymous question here I see. On period of time, units must remain affordable. I see in the Q&A.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I'm happy to Yeah, I don't, anyone has some comments on that, but I know Montgomery County, for instance, does have requirements that for certain types of units, buyers are subsidized, and they own the home, and as long as they own it, if they sell it, then it has to be sold to somebody else who qualifies for affordable housing. I think there are other rules about rental housing, which I don't know what the period is, but often it's a 20-year period that the housing
30.
has to be. Okay, 30. So I'm corrected here, and that's a consideration, of course, when a developer comes in here and includes additional affordable housing beyond the 12.5% requirement.
On your question, QC, I just wanted to make sure it was public before I talked about it. Yeah, we're exploring using TIFIA for commercial to residential conversions, per an announcement that just happened today.
Breaking news on our
Breaking news.
Wow.
Yeah, White House has this report
Yeah,
published
exactly.
probably early October.
Mm-hmm. Good.
All right.
They just put the plan out today. If you Google like White House office to residential conversion, you'll find that it's like news that hit the streets 6 hours ago.
Very, very relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end of the hour here. I think this has been, I think, a very good and interesting discussion. Following the presentation, I want to thank Sasha for taking the time today to provide us his perspectives on these types of developments, and then for everyone for their questions and input during the webinar. The plan for the next webinar is to hopefully have one in December. So we will not hold one in November, primarily due to the sort of the disruption that the Thanksgiving holiday throws in there, but be looking at doing one a couple weeks after that break or the Thanksgiving holiday. So just keep your eyes out again for the announcements that come out from the Build America Center, and hope you folks will take the time to join us again if the topic happens to be of interest to you. So thanks very much for everybody for joining us, and I hope to see you in December.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Great presentation, Sasha.